Have you ever reached a point in your life where everything that once seemed important suddenly lost its meaning? You tried, you achieved, you searched, and then, almost without warning, it all felt empty. Maybe you thought enlightenment would bring clarity and power, but instead, it brought stillness, even paralysis. What if I told you that this emptiness isn't failure? It's the very gate to a deeper transformation. That's what we'll explore in this video. Have you ever woken up and realized you no longer care about the very things you once thought would save you? The goals, the ambitions, the constant striving, they all feel distant now, like echoes from a life that no longer belongs to you. And yet, in that silence, there's a panic. If I don't want any of it, what's left of me? What you're feeling is not failure. It is the first flicker of something terrifyingly honest. You are no longer able to lie to yourself. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the slow, painful withdrawal of psychic energy from illusions that no longer sustain your soul. When the outer world loses its grip, when the applause fades and the masks begin to slip, what remains is not emptiness. It is the space where truth begins to take shape. But first, everything you thought mattered collapses. The drive to be someone, to prove something, to outrun shame and impress ghosts, suddenly it dissolves. And for a while you might feel paralyzed. You look at your to-do list and feel nothing. You sit in front of your goals and wonder why they feel like prison bars instead of promises. This isn't laziness, it's psychic recalibration. The soul is reclaiming energy from pursuits that were never yours to begin with. You were taught to chase, to strive, to achieve. Not because it fulfilled you, but because it distracted you. From pain, from fear, from emptiness. You built a self-image on the approval of others. And now, after awakening, that structure is no longer sustainable. It begins to crack. And beneath it something ancient stirs. Stillness. But stillness terrifies the ego, because in the stillness, there's no applause, no performance, no validation, only presence, and presence demands that you feel everything you've spent years running from. So you stand at the edge of yourself, disoriented. The old engines won't start. The fire you used to fake can't be forced. You try to motivate yourself like you used to, discipline, pressure, guilt, but none of it works. Why? Because your soul no longer accepts bribes. The things that once gave you meaning now feel hollow, not because you failed, but because you've outgrown the illusion. You can no longer betray yourself just to keep moving. That's the shift. That's the collapse. And it's sacred. There's no going back. The hunger for more, for recognition, for speed, it's burned out. And what's left is not a blank page, but a waiting one. You're not here to be who you were. You're here to remember who you are without needing anything to prove it. And just when you start to accept that nothing external will ever restore what's shifting inside, something even deeper begins to stir. Not a dream, not a goal, but a memory of a self that never needed to strive in the first place. A self that existed before the roles, before the noise, before the masks. And once you begin to feel it, nothing will ever satisfy you again except the truth. What's left of you when there's no one left to impress, no room to perform, no audience to applaud, no role to perfect? What if I told you that the emptiness you feel isn't the absence of self, but the unraveling of a false one? Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to survive the expectations of the world. It is not your true self. It is who you became to be acceptable, lovable, impressive, safe. And now, it's dying. After awakening, something terrifying happens. Your identity begins to collapse. Not in theory, not in metaphor, literally. You no longer resonate with your job, your relationships, your goals. Your behaviors feel hollow, your laughter sounds foreign. You see pictures of yourself and feel like you're staring at a costume. This is not confusion. This is revelation. The persona you've carried, charming, competent, ambitious, pleasing, no longer functions. Not because it's broken, but because it was never you to begin with. It was protection. It was a mask stitched together from childhood wounds, societal scripts, and quiet survival. Now, after awakening, the real you begins to surface. And that emergence is not glorious, it's excruciating. Because the ego is not ready to surrender the image it has spent a lifetime constructing. You might feel lost, anxious, untethered, and rightly so. Because your entire nervous system was conditioned to equate love with performance. Smile to avoid conflict. Work harder to feel worthy. Stay agreeable to avoid abandonment. All of that, every single reflex, begins to fall apart. And what rushes in? Silence. Stillness. A strange sense of being nobody. But this is not regression. It is purification. When the persona dies, your soul finally has room to breathe. No longer squeezed into the mask, no longer bent into character, you begin to hear your own voice beneath the noise. Yet the silence is so unfamiliar, it can feel like danger. You were taught to associate stillness with failure, invisibility with rejection. So now, in this raw state, you might panic. You might try to rebuild the persona again, to fix yourself, to find motivation, to look normal. But deep down, you know the old game is over. This is the dark night of the mask, and it is sacred. Jung warned that most people resist this death because it threatens the ego's illusion of control. But those who allow the disintegration, those who surrender to the unraveling, begin to discover something unexpected. Authenticity doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels naked. But in that nakedness, in that terrifying absence of performance, something new begins to grow. Something you don't have to protect, don't have to polish, don't have to sell. Something real. You are not here to be a character in someone else's play. You are here to remember the self that never needed a stage to exist. And once that self begins to rise, the world you once built around your mask will no longer fit. And that's when the real confrontation begins. Not with others, but with the inner tension between who you've been and who you truly are. Why do you feel so heavy, so numb, so strangely unavailable to life? You used to power through exhaustion. You could force yourself to care, to strive, to show up. But now, even the smallest tasks feel monumental. And perhaps the most confusing part is that there's no clear reason. No crisis. No trauma. Just this quiet, persistent emptiness. Let me tell you what no one ever explained. You are not unmotivated. You are being recalibrated. Carl Jung spoke of psychic energy, what he called libido, not in the sexual sense, but as the fundamental life force that animates your actions, your choices, your attention. And when the unconscious begins to awaken, that energy does not disappear. It retreats. It pulls away from the surface. It turns inward. That's what you're feeling. The fatigue, the disinterest, the "I just don't care anymore." It's not dysfunction, it's redirection. Your energy is no longer being poured into your old identity, your old patterns, your old compulsions. You are undergoing a psychic withdrawal, and it's not optional. For years, your life force was hijacked by the persona, pleasing others, proving yourself, building an identity based on survival. But now that the mask is cracking, your soul refuses to keep feeding a self that no longer exists. This creates what feels like an energetic collapse. You're not depressed in the clinical sense. You're depleted from years of disconnection. And now the psyche is calling all energy back to the center. Why? To prepare for integration. But this middle space, the in-between, is excruciating. You can't go back to the person you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. So you float in the void, disconnected from the world, unsure of your desires, unwilling to fake them. And society will label this as laziness, dysfunction, failure. But Jung saw it differently. He saw it as the soul reclaiming its sovereignty. What you're experiencing is a kind of spiritual detox, a rewiring of attention, a redistribution of meaning. And that requires rest, stillness, emptiness. not as an escape, but as a foundation. You are learning to stop investing your energy where it is not welcomed, not returned, not aligned. And the first step is noticing just how much of your life has been fueled by nervous energy, guilt, or fear of not being enough. So the system shuts down. Motivation disappears, not because you've lost yourself, but because you've found the edge of your old self. You can't force what no longer resonates. You can't return to a life built on adrenaline and applause. And that's the sacred crisis. The system is rebooting, and the next version of you will not be powered by pressure, but by presence. But be warned, as you stop leaking energy into the world around you, something else will awaken. A confrontation far more intense than exhaustion, because once your soul is no longer distracted, it begins to show you what still lives inside the silence. And that's exactly where we're going next. Have you ever noticed how the moment you start to slow down, really slow down, your mind begins to scream? You're falling behind. You're wasting your life. Get up, do something, prove yourself. This is not intuition. This is not guidance. This is the ego, revolting. After a spiritual awakening, when your energy begins to shift inward, the ego panics. Because the ego is not built for stillness. It is built for control, identity, validation, motion. And when those old structures begin to dissolve, the ego doesn't quietly step aside, it fights. Carl Jung understood this rebellion well. He wrote that the ego clings to its identity as a drowning man clings to a piece of wood. Even if that identity is built on pain, shame, or pretense, the ego prefers known suffering over the unknown self. So now, here you are, aware, awake, and deeply uncomfortable. You've tasted a different way of being, quieter, more rooted, more real. But inside your chest, a war begins. One part of you craves presence, peace, simplicity. The other part screams for urgency, productivity, validation. It says, if you don't perform, you will be forgotten. And that terror isn't just mental, it's cellular. It lives in your body. Because the ego's story has been running for so long, it's become embedded in your nervous system. You were praised when you achieved. You were loved when you adapted. You were safe when you were useful. And now, stripped of performance, the ego senses annihilation. It whispers lies. If you don't do more, you'll be nothing. If you rest, you'll fail. If you stop striving, you'll disappear. But these are not truths. They are the final attempts of a dying structure. This is the revolt. It shows up as anxiety, as shame, as sudden bursts of guilt for simply being. You'll notice it when you try to rest and suddenly feel worthless. When you stop pushing and your mind attacks you. When you say no to something small and immediately feel like you're a bad person. But here is what you must remember. The louder the ego screams, the closer you are to freedom. Because you are no longer reacting automatically. You are no longer reaching for distraction. You are no longer betraying yourself just to avoid discomfort. And that, to the ego, is terrifying. You are breaking the spell. And in that breaking, the ego will try every tactic it knows. Inner criticism, self-doubt, even seductive fantasies of going back to the old you. It will try to convince you that this discomfort means something is wrong. But it doesn't. It means something is dying. And what dies is not you. It is the version of you who needed approval to exist. So don't resist the discomfort. Don't run from the noise. Sit with it. Watch it. Breathe through it. Because every time you don't obey the voice of panic, you prove to your nervous system that you are safe, even when you're not performing. And in that safety, something begins to shift. Something ancient. Something calm. Not the ego. Not the mask. But you, the self that does not need to be earned. And once that self begins to emerge, the ego's war becomes irrelevant. Not because it's gone, but because it no longer holds power. And that's when something deeper begins to stir. Not a voice this time, but a silence. Not emptiness, but presence. And in that stillness, something you feared begins to show its face, the void. And what you do with that void will define everything. Have you felt it? That strange, suffocating silence after the collapse? When you've let go of everything false but nothing true has taken its place? You look around and feel nothing. No urgency, no desire, no direction. Just a vast, unsettling stillness. And maybe the scariest thought crosses your mind. What if this is all there is? This space, this void is not a mistake. It is not failure. It is not regression. It is sacred. Carl Jung warned us that the process of individuation doesn't just illuminate who we are. It dismantles who we were not. And once the persona dissolves, once the ego quiets, once the borrowed dreams are laid down, the psyche does not immediately replace them. First, it holds space. That space is the void. But the mind, desperate for meaning, rushes to fill it. It tells you you're broken, depressed, lost. It tells you to go back, chase something, prove yourself, anything to not feel this. But the void is not absence. It is presence without performance. It is the soul's landscape before architecture, before identity, before noise. It is what remains when you no longer cling to anything outside of yourself. And yes, it is terrifying. Because there's nothing left to distract you from yourself. No goal to chase, no mask to wear, no drama to keep you busy. Just you, and everything you've never wanted to face. The void is where the ghosts live. The grief you never processed. The rage you swallowed. The fear you dressed in perfection. They rise here, not to punish you, but to be seen, honored, integrated. Jung said that true healing requires a descent into the depths, and this is it. Not a descent into chaos, but into clarity so pure it reveals everything you've ever avoided. The ego cannot survive here, not because it is destroyed, but because it is no longer needed. You are not being erased, you are being emptied, not for nothing, but for truth, for alignment, for the emergence of something that is not reactive, not conditioned, not borrowed, but yours. But that emergence takes time. And in the meantime, the void invites you to do the hardest thing you've ever done. Nothing. Not in the apathetic sense, but in the sacred, surrendered sense. To sit in the discomfort, to breathe through the silence, to stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, what wants to move through me if I finally listen? The void is not a punishment. It is the womb of the self. And if you stay long enough, still enough, honest enough, you will begin to notice that the stillness is not dead. It pulses. There is life in the silence, direction in the emptiness. There is a new language forming beneath the noise, one that does not speak in ambition but in alignment. And when that language finally reaches you, you will not return to the world as a seeker. You will return as someone who has nothing to chase, because they have found the center from which all movement begins. But first, you must sit through the temptation to escape, because beyond that temptation lies a descent far deeper than silence, a journey into the underworld of your own psyche. And that is where the real work begins. Have you ever wondered why, after awakening, everything feels heavier instead of lighter? You expected peace, clarity, liberation. Instead, you feel grief rising, memories returning, emotions you thought you buried long ago now flooding your body like a storm you cannot contain. And here's the truth you were never told. Awakening does not lift you up. First, it drags you down. Carl Jung understood this well. He called it the descent into the unconscious, a necessary plunge into everything within you that remains unintegrated, unprocessed, unseen. Most people avoid it. They chase the light. They climb toward bliss. But individuation is not an ascension. It is a descent into wholeness. This is the part no one glorifies. The sacred spiral inward. The confrontation with your own shadow. Not just the darkness you show to no one, but the darkness you don't even admit to yourself. Your spiritual awakening was the call. But the real journey begins now, when the light begins to uncover the rot. You begin to feel everything you once suppressed, the grief you were too proud to feel, the rage you were too polite to express, the longing you were too strong to admit. The descent strips you of spiritual fantasies. You stop trying to rise above pain. You stop pretending that being calm is the same as being whole. You begin to feel, fully, uncontrollably, violently at times, because awakening didn't erase your wounds. It simply removed the numbing. And now you stand exposed, naked in front of your own truth. And that truth does not flatter. It does not comfort. It says, this is what you've become in order to survive. Now, are you ready to become what you were meant to be? This descent is not a punishment. It is a return to everything you abandoned in order to be loved. Jung taught that without a conscious descent into the unconscious, we remain fragmented, forever repeating cycles we do not understand, forever mistaking pain for fate. So now, as the layers peel back, you will be tempted to numb again, to distract, to overthink, to run. But the pain that arises is not your enemy, it's your compass. It points directly to what has been buried beneath your persona, your performance, your perfectionism. And if you dare to follow it downward, something miraculous happens. You begin to retrieve the pieces of yourself you had to exile. The child who was told to be quiet, the teenager who swallowed her dreams, the adult who learned to smile through betrayal. One by one, they return. And you don't just see them, you welcome them. That is the descent. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming whole. And yes, it hurts, deeply, because everything that kept you safe no longer fits, because the scaffolding of your false self begins to collapse under the weight of truth. But as you fall, you begin to see something buried beneath the wreckage, a self that was never lost, only silenced. And now, in the darkness, in the depth, in the rawness, that voice begins to speak again. Not loud, not proud, but unmistakably real. And that voice will not lead you back to the surface. It will lead you deeper still, into the part of yourself that frightens you most, the shadow. And there, your greatest confrontation awaits. Have you ever been shocked by your own reaction? A flash of rage, a jealous thought, a cruel fantasy that came out of nowhere. And you wondered, where did that come from? That's not me. But what if it is? Not the whole of you, but a part you've exiled, repressed, buried so deep that when it surfaces it terrifies you. That is the shadow. And it's not your enemy. It's your forgotten self. Carl Jung defined the shadow as everything within us that we refuse to see, yet continues to influence everything we do. Our rage, our shame, our hunger for control, our fear of vulnerability. We hide it under politeness, we spiritualize it, we deny it. But it doesn't disappear, it waits. And when you awaken, it finally has permission to rise. This is not a glitch in the process. It is the process. Because awakening is not about becoming more perfect. It's about becoming more whole. And wholeness requires that you turn toward what you've spent your entire life running from. So now the shadow begins to reveal itself. You see it in your defensiveness, your passive aggression, your controlling behavior. You see it in your judgment of others, especially the traits you claim to despise. You see it in the self-sabotage you can't seem to stop, no matter how aware you've become. And for the first time, you realize, this isn't about fixing anyone else. It's about facing yourself. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is where most people turn back. Because to confront the shadow is to admit that some part of you has always been capable of the very things you judge in others. It's humbling, shameful, brutal at times, but it's also the beginning of true power. Because every part of you that remains unconscious will control you from the dark. The more you reject your shadow, the more it leaks out sideways, in manipulation, in projection. an emotional reactivity that you can't explain. But once you turn toward it, everything changes. You begin to see the rage not as danger, but as a message. You begin to feel the envy not as weakness, but as a clue to what you truly desire. You begin to welcome the darkness, not to indulge it, but to understand it. Because what you integrate, you no longer have to fear. And this is where a new form of strength is born. Not the strength to suppress emotion, but the strength to hold it without becoming it. Not the need to be perfect, but the courage to be honest. You are not here to be pure. You are here to be complete. And when you stop rejecting parts of yourself, something sacred happens. Your energy returns. Not the frantic, scattered kind, but focused, grounded presence. Because no longer are you wasting energy hiding from yourself. The shadow is not a monster. It is a mirror. It shows you what you've disowned, so that you can finally come home to it. And when you do, people around you will notice. Not because you speak louder or shine brighter, but because you've stopped leaking your power trying to seem good. You are simply real. And that realness carries a gravity no mask can imitate. But be warned, the world is not always ready for someone who has nothing left to hide. And the moment you begin to live from that place, you will trigger everything in others that they still refuse to face. And that is when the resistance begins, not within, but around you. Have you ever felt guilty for resting? Like if you're not improving, you're falling behind? Like stillness means you're wasting your potential? That guilt didn't come from your soul. It was planted in you. We live in a culture that worships growth, endless growth, more progress, more healing, more awakening, more expansion. Even your spiritual path gets hijacked by the hunger to level up. But here's a truth no one tells you. Real transformation contracts before it expands. Carl Jung never spoke of linear progress. He spoke of spirals, of rhythms, of cycles where the self retreats inward before re-emerging stronger. Not to ascend constantly, but to integrate deeply. You are not a business plan. You are not a productivity graph. You are a living psyche, a soul with seasons. And if you never allow yourself to contract, to pause, to grieve, to break, your growth becomes just another ego project. You will spiritualize your ambition. You will mistake burnout for awakening. You will keep chasing higher frequencies, brighter lights, while your shadow festers in the basement, untouched. Sometimes your soul doesn't want to expand. It wants to descend, to consolidate, to root. Because not every phase is meant to be explosive. Some are meant to be invisible, internal, quiet. You might feel like nothing is happening, like you've plateaued, like your progress has vanished. But that's exactly when the deepest integration is taking place, beneath the surface. Imagine a tree in winter. From the outside, it looks dead. But under the frozen soil, its roots are deepening. It's preparing, not performing. You are the same. The myth of constant expansion is a trap. It keeps you addicted to achievement even in your healing. It tells you that not feeling inspired is a flaw, that not creating is weakness, that not growing is failure. But sometimes the greatest growth is decay, letting the old die. Letting parts of you fall away, not because they're bad, but because they've served their purpose. Jung taught that individuation is not becoming more, it's becoming whole. And wholeness includes stillness, silence, retreat. The places where the world can't see you, but your soul can finally hear itself. And when you honor that sacred pause, without forcing yourself to produce or perform, your nervous system begins to heal. You no longer demand from yourself what your system can't give. You begin to trust your timing. So no, you are not stuck. You are not regressing. You are resting at the roots, and when the time comes, movement will return. But not as ambition, as alignment. But don't expect the world to understand this rhythm. Because when you stop expanding outward, some will assume you're fading, and their confusion will mirror your old fear. Am I disappearing? That's where we go next, into the paradox of desire. How to reclaim it, not from addiction or ego, but from truth, from stillness, from choice. Have you ever sat in the stillness and asked yourself, what do I actually want now? Not what you were taught to want. Not what your ego is craving. Not what others expect of you. But you. The real you. And maybe in that silence, no answer comes. Not because there's nothing there, but because for the first time, desire is no longer contaminated by addiction. You see, most of what we call desire is not desire at all. It's compulsion. It's reflex. It's a wound trying to resolve itself through achievement, attention, or escape. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that includes your goals, your dreams, your attractions, the things you chased. Many were symptoms, echoes of pain, and now that you've stopped running, you realize how much of your hunger was never yours. And so, a strange emptiness sets in. Not because you're lost, but because your soul refuses to chase ghosts anymore. That's where you are now. The fire of egoic desire has burned out. The hunger for success, control, validation, it no longer moves you. And what's left is this question: can I desire without addiction? Can I want without grasping? Desire, in its purest form, is sacred. It is not striving, it is not clinging. It is a quiet, inner yes, a movement toward aliveness. Not because something is missing, but because something wants to become. But for this kind of desire to awaken, you must clear the debris of all the false longings you once confused with love. You must notice when you want something just to avoid being with yourself. When you crave action because silence scares you. When you pursue someone not because you feel called, but because they reflect a part of you you haven't yet accepted. This is where true self-mastery begins, in recognizing the difference between desire and addiction, between a soul movement and a trauma response. So ask yourself gently, if no one saw me do it, if there were no applause, no reward, would I still choose this? That's how you know it's real. And once real desire returns, it will feel different. It won't scream. It won't demand. It will whisper, steady, grounded, certain, not as an escape from yourself, but as an expression of yourself. You no longer need to be driven by hunger. You move from clarity. You act from stillness. You choose from truth. And when you begin to live from this place, your life no longer looks impressive. It looks true. And while others may not understand this quiet power, this steady joy, this refusal to chase, you will know. Because now, your desire no longer pulls you out of yourself. It brings you home. And the more rooted you become in that home, the more you realize movement is still possible. Action is still sacred. But not when it's forced, only when it flows from presence. And that's where we go next, into the mystery of stillness, and why it holds more power than you were ever allowed to believe. Have you ever sat in complete stillness, not as a technique but as a surrender, and felt something ancient awaken inside you? Not a voice, not a thought, but a presence, a quiet that doesn't feel empty, but eternal. In a world that celebrates noise, pace, and productivity, stillness is treated like death. But Jung understood something the modern world has forgotten. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is life in its purest form. When your external ambitions collapse, when the ego surrenders, when your desires return home to silence, there is a moment where it feels like nothing is happening. But beneath that still surface, the deepest transformation is occurring. Because stillness is not stagnation. It is integration. All the insights you've had, all the truths that surfaced during your descent, all the shadows you've met, they do not become wisdom until they are digested in stillness. But this is the part the ego hates most. Because in stillness, there's nothing to perform, no identity to build, no effort to praise, just being, just breath, just now. It is here that you realize something powerful. You don't need to do in order to become. You don't need to push in order to evolve. You don't need to chase in order to arrive. Jung spoke often of holding the tension of opposites. And in stillness, that tension reveals itself. The urge to move, yet the call to stay. The pressure to achieve, yet the peace of enoughness. The temptation to speak, yet the sacredness of silence. And when you stay long enough in this sacred pause, you begin to sense it. Will. Not the frantic drive of compulsion, but the steady flame of inner movement. It is not loud, it is not fast, but it is real. Stillness is the crucible where your false self dies and your authentic self begins to choose again. From stillness you begin to act, not react. You begin to speak, not perform. You begin to move, not escape. And this kind of movement carries weight, not the weight of pressure, but of presence. People feel it. Your words pierce more deeply. Your silence speaks more loudly, because it comes from someone who no longer leaks energy trying to be seen. You are no longer trying to be powerful. You are being powerfully present, and now, your energy is concentrated. Not scattered across personas, not diluted by shame, but whole, rooted, directed. This is the rebirth of your will, not enslaved to fear or longing, but aligned with truth. And when you begin to live from this kind of stillness, a quiet authority emerges. Not because you dominate others, but because you no longer abandon yourself. But be prepared. As you start to stand in this new frequency, the world around you will begin to shift. Not everyone will welcome this stillness, because your presence will reflect back to them everything they are still trying to outrun. And that's where the real test begins, when you no longer wobble in the face of their discomfort, when you remain still, even as others demand you move, when you no longer lose yourself to remain acceptable. Because now, the authority is within. And from this stillness, a deeper knowing begins to rise. A knowing that you no longer need anyone's permission to exist as you are. And the moment you live from that knowing, you stop being a follower of systems and become the center of your own life. That is what awaits you next. Not confidence, but inner authority, the kind no one gave you because it was always yours. Have you ever paused and realized you're no longer waiting for permission? Not to speak, not to choose, not to exist. Something within you, quiet, grounded, undeniable, has taken the seat you used to reserve for others. And for the first time, you're not asking, is this okay? You're asking, is this true? This is the moment Jung described as the rise of the self, the emergence of a new center of gravity, no longer orbiting around expectations, guilt, or fear, but anchored in inner authority. And it doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply knows. Until now, your identity was shaped in response to something. The need for approval, the fear of rejection, the pressure to perform. You gave others the power to define your worth. You asked for validation before you acted. You apologized for your existence before anyone questioned it. But when you've descended, integrated, and returned to stillness, something else begins to emerge. Not from ego, but from essence. You no longer look outward for what is right. You feel inward for what is real. And that shift changes everything. You begin to say no without guilt. You set boundaries without explaining them. You walk away from situations that no longer resonate, not to prove anything, but because they no longer belong to your frequency. This is not rebellion. It is sovereignty. The old version of you needed a script. It asked, what should I do? But now you ask, what aligns with who I am becoming? Because now, you are no longer ruled by reactivity. You've made space between stimulus and response, and in that space, your clarity lives. Carl Jung taught that individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world wants you to be. But he also warned, the price of becoming whole is the death of the false center. And you've paid that price. in silence, in solitude, in shadow. Now, you rise, not with armor, but with presence. And people around you feel it. Some respect it, some resist it. Because when you embody inner authority, you disturb everything built on external control. You will be called arrogant, too much, too distant, too intense. But that's not your burden. That's their discomfort in the face of someone who no longer needs to be managed. Because when you stop abandoning yourself to belong, you redefine what belonging even means. You no longer seek tribes built on sameness. You attract connections built on resonance. And perhaps most powerfully, you no longer fear solitude. Because you've met yourself in the silence. And that self does not disappear when the world turns away. This is not a phase. It is a foundation. You are not becoming someone new. You are remembering someone eternal. And from that memory, your life begins to take a new shape, not out of habit, fear, or pressure, but out of choice. Choice that flows from the deepest alignment. Choice that carries no apology. Choice that honors your wholeness. And when you begin to live like this, something radical happens. You realize that the greatest freedom is not in being seen. It's in being undeniably yourself, even when no one's watching. But this authority will be tested, and the final test is not internal. It comes from the moment the world pushes back, hard. Because the more real you become, the more resistance you will face. And the next step of your evolution will not be about clarity or integration. It will be about courage. The courage to remain true when everything around you tries to pull you back into who you used to be. Have you ever realized that no one is coming to save you? Not because the world is cruel, but because you no longer need to be saved. You've descended into the depths. You've confronted your shadow, reclaimed your energy, released the mask, and awakened your inner authority. Now the question is no longer, who am I? It is, will I choose to live from this place every single day? Carl Jung taught that individuation is not a destination, but a living choice. Not a one-time breakthrough, but a constant act of remembering. Because the world won't stop tempting you to forget. It will offer comfort in exchange for your silence. It will reward performance and punish presence. It will ask you to be easy to digest, even if that means abandoning yourself again. But this time, you know better. You've seen what it costs to betray yourself. You've tasted the peace of stillness, the power of truth, the clarity of inner alignment. And now, it is sacred. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. You will still feel fear. You will still be misunderstood. You will still have days when the old patterns whisper like sirens. But now, you don't follow blindly. Now you choose. You choose what you give your energy to. You choose what you allow into your body, your mind, your soul. You choose what you bow to, and what you finally walk away from. And that choice is everything. Because in a world addicted to reaction, your ability to respond from presence is revolutionary. To love without losing yourself. To speak without performing. To walk away without guilt. To rest without shame. To lead without dominance. To live without masks. That is power. Not the kind that controls others, but the kind that no one can take from you. And the beauty is this. You don't need to change the world. You need to stop letting the world change you. You didn't come here to be safe. You came here to be true. To live as a whole human being, raw, real, integrated. That is the gift of this journey. Not comfort, but congruence. Not perfection, but presence. So now, you stand at the edge of the ordinary and the sacred. You've crossed too far to return to the mask. And the path ahead is not mapped out. It is carved with every yes you offer to your truth, and every no you whisper to self-betrayal. And the world will notice, not because you are louder, but because you are no longer pretending. Your stillness will speak. Your gaze will carry weight. Your presence will change rooms, because it is not rooted in force but in essence. And so I ask you now, are you willing to live like that? Not just in moments of clarity, but in moments of doubt. Not just when it's easy, but when it costs you. Because your life is not happening to you. It is being created, choice by choice, breath by breath, by the version of you that you commit to embody. Choose her, choose him, choose the self that has waited through darkness, silence, and fire, for this very moment. And if this voice inside you says yes, then walk forward, not fast, not loud, but unshakably true. And don't forget, the next video is also part of this journey. It's important. You need to keep going. Because real transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens every time you decide not to turn back. See you there.